The snow was falling hard that December evening in 1892 when Mary walked home from the schoolhouse. She pulled her coat tight around her shoulders as the cold wind cut through the streets of Cedar Ridge, Montana. As the town's only schoolteacher, she often stayed late to prepare lessons for the next day. Mary was 28 years old and had been teaching in this small mountain town for 5 years. She lived alone in a small house near the edge of town, which was unusual for a woman. Her age, most women were married by now, but Mary had always been different. She cared more about teaching children than finding a husband. As she walked past the old Henderson farm, something caught her eye. The barn had been empty since the Henderson family died from sickness months ago. But tonight she saw a tiny flicker of light coming from inside. Mary stopped and listened carefully. Was that crying she heard? Her heart started beating faster. Who could be in that old barn on such a cold night? She knew she should probably go home and mind her own business. That's what most people in town would do, but something inside her wouldn't let her walk away. Mary pushed open the creaky barn door and stepped inside. The smell hit her first, unwashed bodies and something else she couldn't name. As her eyes got used to the darkness, she gasped at what she saw. 3 small children huddled together in the corner, wrapped in torn blankets. They looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes like scared animals. The oldest was a girl who looked about 8 years old. Next to her sat a boy who couldn't be more than 6. In the girl's arms was a tiny child, maybe 4 years old, with tangled hair and a dirty face. "Please don't hurt us," whispered the older girl, holding the little one closer. Mary's heart broke into pieces. These children were skin and bones. Their clothes were nothing but rags, and their faces were pale and hollow. How long had they been living like this? "I'm not going to hurt you," Mary said softly, crouching down to their level. "My name is Mary. I'm a teacher here in town." "What are your names?" The children looked at each other, unsure if they should trust this stranger. Finally, the older girl spoke. "I'm Lucy," she said quietly. "This is my brother Ben, and this is our little sister Rose. Our mama and papa died when everyone got sick. We didn't have anywhere else to go." Mary felt tears sting her eyes. She had heard about the typhoid outbreak that hit some of the farming families outside town. Many people had died, but she didn't know children had been left behind with no one to care for them. "How long have you been living here?" she asked. "Since the snow started," Ben answered. His voice was weak and scratchy. That was almost 2 months ago. These children had been surviving in this freezing barn for 2 months, with no heat, barely. "Any food and no one to help them? Are you hungry?" Mary asked, though she already knew the answer. All 3 children nodded eagerly. When was the last time they had eaten a real meal? Mary made a decision that would change all their lives forever. She didn't think about what the people in town would say. She didn't worry about how she would manage. She just knew these children needed help, and she was going to give it to them. "You're coming home with me," she said firmly. "Tonight." "Right." Now, Lucy shook her head quickly. "We can't pay you anything. We don't have any money." "I don't want your money," Mary replied. "I want to help you, all of you." She helped the children gather their few belongings, just some torn blankets and a small bag with broken toys. Rose was so weak she could barely walk, so Mary picked her up and carried her. The little girl felt as light as a feather. The walk to Mary's house seemed to take forever in the snow. The children moved slowly, and Mary could hear them breathing hard. They were sicker than she first thought when they finally reached her. Small house, Mary quickly lit the fireplace and put water on to boil. She wrapped the children in her warmest blankets and made them sit close to the fire. "When did you last eat?" she asked as she searched her kitchen for food. "Yesterday, I think," Lucy said. "A nice lady gave us some bread, but we had to make it last." Mary felt angry and sad at the same time. How could anyone know these children were suffering and not help them? But she pushed those thoughts away. Right now, she needed to focus on taking care of them. She made warm soup and watched as the children ate like they hadn't seen food in days, which they probably hadn't. Rose fell asleep in Lucy's arms before she could finish eating. "You'll sleep in my bed tonight," Mary told them, "all 3 of you. I'll sleep on the chair by the fire." "We can't take your bed," Lucy protested. "You've already done too much." "Nonsense," Mary said. "You're just children. You need rest and warmth." As she tucked them into her bed, Mary looked at their thin faces and made another decision. This wasn't just for one night. These children needed a real home, and she was going to give them one. She didn't know how she would manage on a teacher's small salary. She didn't know what the people in town would say about an unmarried woman taking in 3 orphan children. She didn't know anything about raising children or taking care of sick little ones, but as she watched them sleep peacefully for the first time in months, Mary knew she was doing the right thing. These children had no one else in the world. If she didn't help them, who would? Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the town in white silence. Inside Mary's small house, 3 orphan children slept safely for the first time since their parents died. And by the firelight, their new guardian sat planning how she would give them the life they deserved. Mary had no idea that this simple act of kindness would soon turn her whole world upside down. She didn't know that many people in town would be angry with her decision. She couldn't imagine that she would soon face the biggest fight of her life. Just to keep these children safe, all she knew was that 3 innocent children needed help, and she had the power to give it to them. That was enough for now. Word traveled fast in a small town like Cedar Ridge. By the next morning, everyone knew that the schoolteacher had taken in the 3 orphan children from the old barn. And not everyone was happy about it. Mary woke up early to make breakfast for the children. Lucy, Ben, and Rose were still sleeping peacefully in her bed. For the first time in months, they looked relaxed. But Mary's peaceful morning was about to be shattered. A loud knock came at her door just as she was setting the table. When she opened it, she found Mrs. Patterson, the mayor's wife, standing on her porch with a stern look on her face. "Mary Sullivan, what do you think you're doing?" Mrs. Patterson demanded, pushing past Mary into the house. "I'm taking care of 3 children who needed help," Mary replied calmly. Though her heart was racing, Mrs. Patterson looked around the small house with disapproval. "This is completely inappropriate. An unmarried woman has no business raising children, especially children like these." "Children like what?" Mary asked, her voice getting sharper. "You know what I mean. These children come from poor farming stock. Nobody knows anything about their family background. They could have bad blood. And you, a respectable teacher, taking them in without even asking the town council? It's scandalous." Mary felt her anger rising, but she kept her voice low so she wouldn't wake the children. "They're just children, Mrs. Patterson. They were starving and cold." "That's what the county orphanage is for," Mrs. Patterson snapped. "You had no right to make this decision on your own." After Mrs. Patterson left, more visitors came. The banker, Mr. Cromwell, stopped by to express his concerns. Then came Mrs. Davis from the general store, shaking her head and muttering about proper procedures. By afternoon, Mary received an official summons to appear before the town council that evening. She knew this wasn't going to be a friendly meeting. The children sensed something was wrong. Lucy, who was wise beyond her 8 years, asked Mary if they were in trouble. "No, sweetheart," Mary assured her. "You 3 aren't in trouble? Some of the grown-ups in town just need time to understand that you belong here now." But inside, Mary was worried. Cedar Ridge was a conservative town where people followed strict rules about how things should be done. A single woman raising children was almost unheard of. That evening, Mary walked into the town hall with her head held high. The 5 council members sat behind a long table, looking serious and disapproving. Mayor Hutchinson, a large man with a thick mustache, spoke. "First, Miss Sullivan, we've called this meeting to discuss your recent actions regarding the 3 orphan children." "Their names are Lucy, Ben, and Rose," Mary said firmly. "And they're not just orphan children, they're human beings who needed help." "Be that as it may," the mayor continued, "your decision to take them in without consulting this council was highly inappropriate. You're an unmarried woman with no experience raising children." Councilman Brooks, who owned the largest ranch in the area, leaned forward. "Miss Sullivan, we understand you meant well, but this situation is unsuitable. These children need proper care in a proper family setting. They're getting proper care, Mary replied. They're clean, fed, and safe. They're already getting better. That's not the point, Mayor Hutchinson said. The point is that you're not qualified to raise them. You're not married. You have no husband to help provide for them or guide them properly. Mary felt her cheeks burn with anger. I have a teaching position. I can provide for them. And since when does a woman need a husband to show kindness to children in need? The council members exchanged uncomfortable looks. This wasn't how they expected the conversation to go. Reverend Mills, who served on the council, spoke up in his deep, serious voice. Miss Sullivan, God has ordained certain roles for men and women. A woman's place is to be a helpmate to her husband and mother to her own children. Taking in these orphans without a husband's guidance goes against the natural order. The natural order? Mary couldn't keep the anger out of her voice anymore. What's natural about letting children freeze to death in a barn? The meeting went on for 2 hours. The council members made their position clear. Mary must give up the children to the county orphanage or face consequences. What kind of consequences? Mary asked. Mayor Hutchinson's voice was cold. Your teaching position could be reconsidered. After all, we can't have someone setting such a poor example for our community's children. Mary left the meeting feeling shaken but determined. They were threatening her job, the only way she had to support herself and now the children. But she wouldn't back down. The next day brought more trouble. When Mary arrived at the schoolhouse, she found several parents waiting for her, including Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Davis. We've decided to remove our children from your class, Mrs. Patterson announced. We can't have them influenced by someone who shows such poor judgment. One by one, parents pulled their children out of Mary's class. By the end of the week, her classroom had gone from 25 students to just 8. The school board called an emergency meeting and cut her salary in half, but the worst came on Sunday. Mary had always attended church regularly, sitting in the same pew every week. This Sunday, she brought Lucy, Ben, and Rose with her. They wore the best clothes she could find for them and sat quietly beside her. Reverend Mills used his sermon to speak directly about Mary's situation, though he never mentioned her by name. He talked about the dangers of defying God's plan and the importance of following proper authority. He spoke about the corruption that could come from taking matters into one's own hands. Mary felt every eye in the church on her and the children. She saw people whispering and pointing. When the service ended, most people avoided her completely. A few brave souls smiled at the children, but no one offered any support, walking home from church. Mary heard Ben ask Lucy, "Why don't they like us?" Lucy, trying to be brave, whispered back, "It's not us they don't like. It's because Miss Mary is taking care of us without being married." Mary's heart broke hearing the children blame themselves for the town's anger. That night, after tucking them into bed, she sat by the fireplace wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. Maybe the town council was right. Maybe she wasn't qualified to raise these children. Maybe she was being selfish, thinking she could handle this on her own. But then she heard Rose crying softly in the bedroom. When Mary went to check on her, the little girl reached up with her thin arms. "I had a bad dream," Rose whispered. "I dreamed you went away and left us in the cold barn again." Mary picked up the little girl and held her close. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart, I promise." As she rocked Rose back to sleep, Mary's determination returned. These children trusted her. They were finally starting to heal and feel safe. She wouldn't let the town's narrow thinking destroy that, but she also knew this was just the beginning. The pressure from the community would only get worse. Soon, she would have to find a way to fight for these children and for the right to give them the love and care they deserved. Little did Mary know that her greatest challenge was still coming, and that help would arrive from the most unexpected source. Winter in Cedar Ridge was harsh that year, but the cold inside Mary's house had nothing to do with the weather. It came from the town's growing hostility toward her and the 3 children she refused to abandon, with her teaching salary cut in. Half and most of her students pulled from class. Mary faced a financial crisis she had never imagined. The small amount of money she had saved was disappearing quickly. Food, medicine for the children's lingering coughs, warm clothes, and coal for heating, everything cost more than she could afford. Mary had always been proud and independent. She had never asked anyone for help before. But now, with 3 young lives depending on her, she swallowed her pride and tried to find other ways to earn money. She started taking in sewing work, staying up late by candlelight to mend clothes, and alter dresses for the few women in town who would still do business with her. Her fingers grew raw from the constant needlework, but the pay was barely enough to buy bread and milk. When sewing wasn't enough, Mary began taking in washing. Every morning, she would heat large pots of water and scrub clothes on the washboard, until her back ached. Lucy, despite being only 8 years old, helped by hanging the clothes to dry and watching Rose while Mary worked. "Miss Mary, your hands are bleeding," Lucy said one evening, seeing the cuts and calluses on Mary's fingers. "It's nothing, dear," Mary replied, hiding her hands behind her back. "They'll heal," but Lucy wasn't fooled. She had grown up fast during her time in the barn, and she could see that their new guardian was suffering because of them. The children themselves were slowly getting better. Ben's cough was almost gone, and Rose was starting to gain a little weight. They laughed more often now, especially when Mary read to them in the evenings by the fireplace. But they also sensed the tension in the house and the whispers that followed them whenever they went to town. Going to the general store became an ordeal. Mrs. Davis would serve Mary, but only after helping everyone else first. She would slam items down on the counter and count change with obvious annoyance. Other customers would stop talking when Mary entered and watch her with suspicious eyes. One day, when Mary was buying flour with her last few coins, she overheard 2 women talking. "I heard she's having trouble paying her bills," one whispered. "Good," the other replied. "Maybe now she come to her senses and send those children where they belong." Mary pretended not to hear, but her face burned with embarrassment and anger. She paid for her flour and left quickly, with Lucy holding tightly to her hand. The worst part was the letters. They started appearing under Mary's door in the middle of the night. Most were unsigned, but the messages were clear. "Send those children away before something bad happens. You're not wanted here. This town doesn't need troublemakers." Mary burned the letters so the children wouldn't see them, but she couldn't burn away the fear they created. What if someone tried to hurt the children? What if the harassment got worse? One particularly difficult night, when the coal had run out and the house was freezing cold, Mary sat by the dying fire wondering how much longer she could keep fighting. The children were asleep, huddled together under every blanket she owned. She had given them the last of the bread for dinner, telling them she wasn't hungry. That's when she heard the sound that made her blood run cold, rocks hitting her windows. Mary crept to the window and peeked out through the curtains. 3 men stood in her yard, their faces hidden by the darkness. One of them threw another rock, which cracked the glass. "Send those brats away," one of them shouted. "This is a decent town." Mary's hands shook as she watched them throw more rocks. One broke her front window completely, sending cold air rushing into the house. The noise woke the children, who came running to her in terror. "What's happening?" Ben asked, his eyes wide with fear. "It's nothing," Mary lied, pulling all 3 children away from the windows. "Just some people being foolish. It will stop soon." But the men didn't stop for another 10 minutes. They threw rocks, shouted threats, and kicked at her fence before finally walking away. Laughing among themselves, Mary spent the rest of the night, covering the broken window with boards and trying to calm the frightened children. Rose wouldn't stop crying, and Ben kept asking if the bad men were coming back. "Are we safe here?" Lucy asked quietly while Mary tucked them back into bed. Mary wanted to say yes, but she wasn't sure anymore. "I won't let anyone hurt you," she promised instead. "Whatever happens, I'll protect you." The next morning brought new problems. When Mary went to draw water from the well, she found it had been contaminated with dirt and debris. Someone had poisoned their water supply during the night. She had to walk 2 miles to the nearest clean well, carrying heavy buckets back home. The children offered to help, but Mary refused to let them make the dangerous journey through town where people might say cruel things to them. That afternoon, Dr. Collins, the town's only doctor, came to her door. Mary's heart jumped with hope. Maybe someone finally wanted to help them, but Dr. Collins didn't bring good news. "Mary, I've been asked by the town council to examine the children and report on their condition." "They're fine," Mary said quickly. "They're getting better every day." "I'm sure they are, but I still need to examine them. It's official business." Mary had no choice but to let him in. Dr. Collins was kind to the children, but Mary could tell he was looking for any sign that they weren't being cared for properly. He checked their weight, listened to their breathing, and asked them questions about how they felt. "They seem healthy enough," he admitted as he prepared to leave. "But Mary, this situation can't continue forever. These children need stability, and you're struggling to provide it." "I'm managing just fine," Mary said firmly. Dr. Collins shook his head sadly. "No, you're not. And everyone in town can see it. Your house is falling apart, you're working yourself to death, and now there's talk of violence. Is this really what's best for these children?" After he left, Mary looked around her house with new eyes. The broken window, the worn furniture, the empty pantry. Maybe Dr. Collins was right. Maybe she was being selfish, trying to keep the children, when she could barely take care of herself that evening. As she watched Lucy help Ben with his reading while Rose played with a doll made from old rags, Mary realized something important. Despite all their struggles, these children were happy. They were learning, growing, and healing. They felt safe and loved, even in this small, poor house. Yes, they didn't have fancy clothes or expensive toys. Yes, Mary was exhausted and worried about money. But the children had something they had never had before, a real home with someone who truly cared about them. "Miss Mary," Rose said, climbing into her lap with a book, "will you read us a story?" Mary smiled for the first time in days. "Of course, sweetheart. Which story would you like?" As she read to the children by the firelight, Mary felt her determination return. She wouldn't give up. Somehow, she would find a way to make this work. These children deserved a chance at happiness, and she was going to give it to them, no matter what the town thought. But deep down, Mary knew she couldn't fight this battle alone much longer. She needed help, and she needed it soon. Little did she know that help was already on its way to Cedar Ridge, in the form of a quiet cowboy who understood exactly what it meant to be alone in the world. The stranger rode into Cedar Ridge on a cold February morning, leading a pack horse and looking like he had traveled a long way. People in town stopped what they were doing to watch him pass. Strangers were rare in their small mountain community, especially in the middle of winter. Jack Morrison was 35 years old, tall and lean from years of hard work on the range. His face was weathered by sun and wind, and his hands were rough from handling cattle and horses. He wore simple clothes, worn boots, faded jeans, and a heavy coat that had seen better days. But there was something about the way he sat his horse and looked around town that told people he was not a man to be taken lightly. Jack had been gone from Cedar Ridge for 5 years, building a ranch in the Northern Territory. Before that, he had worked for various ranchers in the area, saving every penny he could. He was known as a quiet man who kept to himself, but also as someone who was fair and honest in his dealings. What most people in town didn't know was that Jack had grown up as an orphan himself. His parents had died when he was 6 years old, and he had spent years moving from one farm to another, working for his keep. He understood what it meant to be alone and unwanted in the world. Jack had come back to Cedar Ridge to buy cattle and supplies for his ranch. He planned to stay just a few days, conduct his business, and leave. But fate had other plans. On his second day in town, Jack was walking past Mary's house when he heard shouting. He stopped and looked toward the commotion. Mayor Hutchinson stood on Mary's front porch with 2 other men, their voices raised in anger. "This has gone on long enough, Miss Sullivan," the mayor was saying. "You will turn those children over to the proper authorities today, or we will take them by force." Jack couldn't see the woman they were talking to, but he heard her voice, clear and strong despite the fear he could detect underneath. "You have no legal right to take these children from me," Mary said. I'm caring for them properly, and they're happy here. You're an unmarried woman with no means to support them? One of the other men shouted back. This is indecent and improper. That's when Jack saw the children. 3 small faces peered out from behind the woman's skirts, 2 girls, and a boy, all looking terrified. The sight hit Jack like a punch to the stomach. He remembered being that scared, that helpless, when adults argued about what to do with him. Please, the woman continued, they've been through enough. Don't frighten them like this. We're taking them now, Mayor Hutchinson declared, stepping toward the door. That's when Jack decided he had seen enough. He walked across the street, his boots making loud sounds on the wooden sidewalk. The men on the porch turned to look at him. Afternoon, Mayor, Jack said calmly, touching the brim of his hat. Is there some kind of problem here? Mayor Hutchinson's face reddened. This is none of your concern, Morrison. This is town business. Jack looked at the frightened children, then at the woman protecting them. She was younger than he expected, with tired eyes but a determined set to her jaw. Her clothes were worn but clean, and despite the obvious stress of the situation, she held herself with dignity. Seems to me, Jack said quietly, that when grown men are threatening children, it becomes everyone's concern. We're not threatening anyone, the mayor blustered. We're trying to do what's best for these orphans. This woman has no business raising them. Jack studied the scene more carefully. The children were clean and well cared for, though their clothes were simple. They stayed close to the woman, clearly trusting her to protect them. The woman herself looked exhausted but determined. The children look healthy and happy to me, Jack observed. What exactly is the problem? Before the mayor could answer, more men appeared at the end of the street. Jack recognized them as some of the mayor's supporters. Men who liked to throw their weight around when they had the advantage of numbers. Jack Morrison, one of them called out, you've been gone a long time. This doesn't concern you. Jack's jaw tightened. He had dealt with bullies before, and he recognized the tactics. Get enough men together, make a lot of noise, and intimidate anyone who couldn't fight back. Miss, he said, turning to Mary, are these children legally in your care? Mary nodded. They have nowhere else to go. Their parents died, and I've been taking care of them for 2 months. And have you been feeding them, housing them, and keeping them safe? Of course I have, Mary replied, confused by the strangers' questions but grateful for his intervention. Jack turned back to the mayor. Then I don't see what business it is of yours or anyone else's how this lady chooses to spend her time and money. She's not married, Mayor Hutchinson sputtered. It's not proper for an unmarried woman to be raising children. Is there a law against it? Jack asked calmly. The mayor hesitated. Well, no, but then I suggest you leave these people alone, Jack said. His voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath it. The tension on the porch grew thick. The mayor and his men clearly wanted to push the issue, but something about Jack's calm confidence made them hesitate. He wasn't a big man, but he carried himself like someone who had faced down trouble before and wasn't afraid to do it again. Finally, Mayor Hutchinson backed down. This isn't over, Morrison. And Miss Sullivan, you haven't heard the last from U.S.? The men left, muttering among themselves and shooting angry looks back at Jack and Mary. When they were gone, Jack turned to Mary, who was still standing protectively in front of the children. Thank you, she said simply. I don't know who you are, but thank you for standing up for us. Name's Jack Morrison, he said, removing his hat. And you don't need to thank me. I just don't like seeing children frightened by adults who should know better. Mary studied his face, trying to understand why a stranger would risk making enemies in town to help her. I'm Mary Sullivan. These are Lucy, Ben, and Rose. Jack nodded to each child, noting how they stayed close to Mary but seemed less frightened now that the angry men were gone. Can I ask you something, Miss Sullivan? Jack said. How long have you been dealing with this kind of trouble? Mary's shoulders sagged a little. Since the day I brought them home. The whole town thinks I'm wrong to keep them. And what do you think? Mary looked down at the children, then back at Jack. I think they needed someone to care about them, and I do. That should be enough. Jack was quiet for a moment, studying the small family on the porch. He saw the broken window that had been hastily repaired, the worn clothes, the signs of financial struggle. But he also saw something else, real love and care between this woman and these children. "You're right," he said finally. "It should be enough, but unfortunately, it sounds like the folks in this town don't agree. They want to send the children to the county orphanage," Mary explained. "But I've heard terrible things about that place. These children have suffered enough." Jack knew about county orphanages. He had spent time in one himself as a child. The memory of cold rooms, sparse meals, and harsh discipline was still fresh in his mind after all these years. That evening, Jack couldn't stop thinking about what he had witnessed. He had seen the love in Mary's eyes when she looked at those children, and the trust in their faces when they looked at her. He had also seen the determination of the men who wanted to separate them. As he sat in his room at the boarding house, Jack made a decision that would change all their lives. He had money now, and land, and the respect that came with success. Maybe it was time to use those advantages to help someone else the way he had once needed help. The next morning he rode out to Mary's house again. When she answered his knock, she looked surprised to see him. "Mr. Morrison? Is something wrong?" "No, ma'am," Jack said, holding his hat in his hands. "I was wondering if we could talk about those children and the trouble you're facing." Mary hesitated, then stepped outside and closed the door behind her. "What about them?" Jack looked her in the eye. "I think you're doing a good thing, trying to keep those children together and safe. And I think you could use some help doing it." "I appreciate your support yesterday," Mary said carefully, "but I don't need charity." "I'm not offering charity," Jack replied. "I'm offering partnership. Those children need a home, and you need help providing it. Let me help you raise them." Mary stared at him in shock. This man was a virtual stranger, and he was offering to help her care for 3 orphan children. It seemed too good to be true. "Why?" she asked simply. Jack was quiet for a long moment. "Because I know what it's like to be one of those children," he said finally. "And I know what it's like to have someone care enough to help when everyone else turns away." For the first time in months, Mary felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't have to fight this battle alone anymore. Mary stared at Jack for a long moment, trying to understand why this stranger would want to help her and the children. In her experience, people always wanted something in return, especially men. She had learned to be careful and suspicious, particularly after months of dealing with the town's hostility. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "You don't even know us. Why would you want to get involved in our troubles?" Jack shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable talking about personal matters. "Like I said, I was an orphan myself. I know what those children are going through." "But that doesn't explain why you'd want to help raise them," Mary pressed. "That's a big responsibility for someone who isn't related to them." Jack was quiet for a moment, looking out at the mountains in the distance. When he spoke again, his voice was soft. "When I was 7 years old, my parents died in a fire. I had nowhere to go, no family to take me in. I spent 2 years in a county orphanage, the same one they want to send your children to." Mary's expression softened as she began to understand. "It was a hard place," Jack continued. "Cold buildings, not enough food, and people who saw us as burdens instead of children. I was lucky. When I was 9, a rancher named Tom Henderson took me in. He and his wife couldn't have children of their own, and they needed help on their ranch." "The Hendersons were good people," Mary said, recognizing the name. "They died a few years ago." "Yes, they did. And they gave me something I never expected to have, a real home and a chance at a decent life. Tom taught me everything about ranching, and Mrs. Henderson made sure I could read and write. They never legally adopted me, but they treated me like their own son." Jack paused, his eyes growing distant with memory. "When Tom was dying, he told me something I'll never forget. He said the best way to honor what they'd given me was to pass it on to someone else who needed it." Mary felt tears sting her eyes. She was beginning to see Jack in a completely different light. "So, you see," Jack said, looking at her directly, "I know what it means to be saved by someone's kindness. And I know what those children are facing if they end up in that orphanage. But helping us would make you enemies in this town, Mary pointed out. People are already angry with me. If you get involved, they'll turn on you too, Jack shrugged. I've got my own ranch now, up north. I don't need anything from the people in this town. And I've dealt with worse things than angry neighbors. Mary was still hesitant. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that we work together to give those children what they need, Jack said simply. I can help with money, with repairs to your house, with protection if those men come back. In return, you keep doing what you're already doing, caring for them, teaching them, giving them love. And what would you get out of this arrangement? Mary asked, still suspicious. Jack smiled slightly. The satisfaction of knowing 3 children get to grow up in a real home instead of an institution. That's enough for me. Over the next few days, Mary watched Jack carefully. He kept his word about helping, but he did it quietly and without making a big show of it. He repaired her broken windows, fixed the leaky roof, and brought firewood without being asked. When she protested that she couldn't pay him, he just shrugged and said he enjoyed having something useful to do while he was in town. The children were cautious around Jack at first. They had learned to be wary of men, especially after the frightening encounter with the mayor and his supporters. But Jack seemed to understand their fear. He never tried to force conversations or get too close too quickly. Instead, he let them observe him from a distance while he worked. It was Ben who warmed up to Jack first. The 6-year-old was fascinated by Jack's horse and spent hours watching him care for the animal. One day, Jack noticed Ben staring and invited him over. Want to help me brush him? Jack asked casually. Ben looked back at Mary for permission, then nodded eagerly. Jack showed him how to hold the brush and move it in long, smooth strokes along the horse's coat. What's his name? Ben asked. Thunder, Jack replied, because when he runs, his hooves sound like thunder on the ground. Can I ride him someday? Ben asked hopefully. Maybe when you're a little bigger and stronger, Jack said. But first, you need to learn how to take care of horses properly. That's the most important part. From that day on, Ben followed Jack around whenever he was working, asking endless questions about horses and ranching. Jack answered each question patiently, treating the little boy's curiosity with respect. Lucy took longer to trust Jack, but she was impressed by how kind he was to her little brother. She watched as Jack taught Ben how to properly feed Thunder and how to check the horse's hooves for stones. She saw how Jack never got impatient, even when Ben asked the same question. Multiple times, Rose, the youngest, was naturally shy around all strangers. But one day, when she fell and scraped her knee, Jack was the only adult nearby. Instead of frightening her more, he knelt down to her level and spoke in a gentle voice. That looks like it hurts, he said softly. Should we go find Miss Mary, so she can make it better? Rose nodded, tears streaming down her face. Jack carefully picked her up and carried her to Mary, talking quietly to distract her from the pain. You know what? He said as they walked. When I was little, I fell down a lot too. Mrs. Henderson used to say that scrapes and bruises were just proof that I was brave enough to try new things. By the time they reached Mary, Rose had stopped crying and was listening intently to Jack's story about learning to ride his first horse. Mary found herself watching these interactions with growing amazement. Jack seemed to instinctively know how to talk to the children, never talking down to them, but not expecting more than they could give either. He treated them with the same respect he would show adults while still being gentle and protective, but what impressed Mary most was Jack's patience with her own suspicions and questions. He never pushed her to trust him faster than she was comfortable with. When she asked him direct questions about his intentions or his past, he answered honestly, even when the topics were clearly difficult for him. One evening after the children were asleep, Mary and Jack sat by the fireplace talking. It had become a habit over the past week, a time when they could discuss plans for the children's future without little ears listening. You never married? Mary asked, curious about this. Man who seemed so comfortable around children but lived alone. Jack shook his head. Never found the right person, I guess. and I've spent most of my adult life building my ranch. Didn't seem fair to ask a woman to share that kind of hard life. It must get lonely, Mary observed. Sometimes, Jack admitted. But I've gotten used to my own company. What about you? You never wanted a family of your own? Mary was quiet for a moment. I always thought I'd marry and have children someday. But I never met a man who supported my desire to keep teaching. Most men in this area expect their wives to give up any interests outside the home. That seems foolish, Jack said. You're a good teacher. The children are lucky to have someone who can educate them properly. Mary looked at him in surprise. It was the first time any man had said her teaching was valuable rather than something she should give up. You really don't mind that I work? She asked. Why would I mind? It's one of the things that makes you qualified to care for these children. They need education just as much as they need food and shelter. As the weeks passed, Mary began to see that Jack meant what he said. He didn't try to take over or make decisions about the children without consulting her. Instead, he supported the routines and rules she had already established. When Lucy needed help with her arithmetic, Jack deferred to Mary's teaching expertise. When Ben had nightmares about the cold barn, Jack let Mary comfort him while offering quiet support. But Jack also brought his own strengths to their small family. He taught Ben practical skills like caring for animals and basic woodworking. He showed Lucy how to braid rope and explained how ranches operated. He carved wooden toys for Rose and told all three children stories about life on the frontier. Most importantly, Jack's presence provided something Mary hadn't realized they needed: security. When the mayor and his supporters made their threats, they had to consider that Jack Morrison was now involved. Jack had money, influence, and a reputation as someone who couldn't be easily intimidated. His support changed the dynamics of their situation significantly. The children began to flourish under this new stability. Ben's confidence grew as he learned new skills from Jack. Lucy started smiling more often, especially when Jack praised her intelligence and quick learning. Rose, who had been the most traumatized by their early experiences, began to relax and act like a normal 4-year-old. Mary found herself developing feelings she hadn't expected. At first she had been grateful for Jack's help but wary of his motives. But as she watched him interact with the children day after day, she began to see the man underneath the rough exterior. Jack was kind, patient, and genuinely caring. He had a quiet sense of humor that made the children laugh, and a steady strength that made Mary feel safer than she had in months. But Mary also worried about what would happen when Jack decided to return to his ranch. This arrangement was supposed to be temporary, just until the immediate crisis with the town council passed. Jack had his. Spring came early to Cedar Ridge that year, but the warming weather brought new troubles for Mary and Jack. Mayor Hutchinson had been quiet for several weeks, and Mary had begun to hope that maybe the town had accepted their arrangement. She should have known better. The trouble started with a visit from a man Mary had never seen before. He was tall and thin, dressed in a dark suit that looked expensive but severe. When he knocked on her door that Tuesday morning, she noticed he carried an official-looking leather briefcase. "Miss Sullivan?" he said when Mary answered the door. "My name is Harold Whitman. I'm a representative from the Territorial Government's Department of Child Welfare." Mary's heart sank. She had heard of this department. They were the ones who decided what happened to orphan children when local communities couldn't agree. "What can I do for you, Mr. Whitman?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm here to investigate reports about 3 orphan children living in your home under questionable circumstances," he said, reading from a paper in his briefcase. "I need to examine the children and your living situation to determine if this arrangement is suitable." Mary knew she had no choice but to let him in. The children were playing in the back room, and she could hear their voices and laughter. At least they sounded happy and healthy. Mr. Whitman spent 2 hours in Mary's house, taking notes about everything he saw. He measured the rooms, counted the beds, checked the pantry for food, and examined the children's clothes. He asked Mary detailed questions about her income, her teaching background, and her plans for the children's future. Then he interviewed each child separately. Mary wasn't allowed to be present during these conversations, which made her extremely nervous. What if the children said something that could be misunderstood? What if they were frightened by this stern stranger? When Mr. Whitman finished his investigation, his expression gave nothing away. "I'll be preparing a report for the territorial authorities," he told Mary. "You should receive their decision within 2 weeks." "What kind of decision?" Mary asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. "Whether this arrangement serves the best interests of the children," Mr. Whitman replied. "If not, alternative arrangements will be made." After he left, Mary sat down heavily at her kitchen table. She knew who had called in the territorial authorities. Mayor Hutchinson and his supporters had found a way to go over the local town council and bring in higher powers. When Jack arrived that evening, he found Mary pale and shaken. The children were unusually quiet, clearly upset by the stranger's visit and all his questions. What did he want to know? Jack asked after Mary explained about Mr. Whitman's visit. "Everything," Mary replied. "How much money I make, where the children sleep, what I feed them, how I discipline them." He acted like I was some kind of criminal instead of someone trying to help these children. Jack was quiet for a moment, his jaw tight with anger. Did he say what would happen next? "He's writing a report. We'll know their decision in 2 weeks. That night, after the children were asleep, Jack and Mary talked about their options. None of them were good. "If the territorial authorities rule against us, they'll take the children to the county orphanage," Mary said, her voice breaking. "I can't let that happen, Jack. You've seen how happy and healthy they are here. They're finally starting to heal from everything they've been through." "I know," Jack said grimly. "We need to find a way to fight this." "How?" "I'm just a school teacher with no political connections. The territorial government has all the power." Jack was quiet for a long time, thinking. Finally he spoke. "There might be a way, but you're not going to like it." "What do you mean?" Jack looked at her seriously. "The main argument against you is that you're an unmarried woman trying to raise children alone. If you weren't unmarried, that argument would disappear." Mary stared at him, slowly understanding what he was suggesting. "You're talking about marriage." "A marriage of convenience," Jack clarified quickly. "Nothing more than a legal arrangement to protect the children. We could have separate bedrooms, separate lives, but on paper you'd have a husband to help support and guide the children." Mary felt her cheeks burn. The idea of marrying Jack stirred feelings she didn't want to examine too closely. But marrying him just to satisfy legal requirements seemed wrong somehow. "That's not fair to you," she said. "You'd be trapped in a marriage you don't want, all to help children who aren't even related to you." "It wouldn't be a trap if we both agreed to it," Jack replied. "And those children are as important to me now as if they were my own family." Mary stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the small garden where the children had been playing earlier. Could she really marry a man she barely knew, even to save the children she loved? "Think about it," Jack said gently. "But don't think too long. We only have 2 weeks." The next few days were tense as they waited for news. Mary found it hard to concentrate on anything, and the children sensed her anxiety. They asked fewer questions and played more quietly, as if they were afraid of making too much noise. Then, on Friday afternoon, the news came, but not in the way they expected. Mary was hanging laundry when she saw a group of men walking toward her house. Mayor Hutchinson led them, followed by Mr. Whitman and 2 other men she didn't recognize. One of them wore a badge that identified him as some kind of law enforcement officer. "Miss Sullivan," Mayor Hutchinson called out when they reached her yard. "We're here on official business." Mary's hands shook as she set down her laundry basket. "What kind of official business?" Mr. Whitman stepped forward with a document. "Based on my investigation and the concerns raised by your community leaders, the territorial authorities have determined that this living arrangement is not in the best interests of these children." "What does that mean?" Mary asked, though she already knew. "It means we're here to remove the children from your custody immediately," the law officer said. "They'll be transported to the county orphanage this afternoon." "No," Mary said, backing toward her house. "You can't do this. The children are happy here." They're healthy and well cared for. Miss Sullivan, please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be, Mr. Whitman said. Call the children out here so we can proceed. I won't let you. Take them, Mary said firmly. They've been through enough trauma. They don't need to be ripped away from the only stable home they've known. You have no legal standing to prevent this, the law officer replied. Now call the children or we'll go in and get them ourselves. That's when Jack appeared. He had been working in the barn and heard the commotion. When he saw the group of men confronting Mary, his expression hardened. What's going on here? He demanded. Mr. Morrison, Mayor Hutchinson said with satisfaction, these gentlemen are here to remove the orphan children from Miss Sullivan's inappropriate care. Jack stepped closer to Mary, positioning himself between her and the men. On what authority? Territorial authority, Mr. Whitman replied, waving his document. Miss Sullivan is an unmarried woman with insufficient means to properly care for 3 children. This arrangement violates established guidelines for child welfare. Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he did something that surprised everyone present. Actually, he said calmly, Miss Sullivan is not unmarried. Mary stared at him in shock. What was he doing? What do you mean? Mr. Whitman asked suspiciously. I mean, she's my wife, Jack said simply. We were married 3 days ago in the next county. We haven't had time to file the paperwork here in Cedar Ridge yet, but I have the marriage certificate with me. Mary's mind reeled. Jack was lying to protect the children and her. But if the men demanded to see this marriage certificate that didn't exist, they would be in even more trouble. But Jack reached into his jacket and pulled out what looked like an official document. Mary couldn't see it clearly, but it appeared to be some kind of certificate with official seals and signatures. Mr. Whitman examined the document carefully, his frown deepening. This appears to be legitimate, he said finally. But why wasn't this information provided during my investigation? Because it's none of your business when 2 adults decide to get married, Jack replied. The point is, these children now have 2 parents providing for them, a stable, married couple with adequate means to support them. The law officer and Mr. Whitman exchanged glances. Their whole case had been built on Mary being an unmarried woman. If she was married to a man with property and income, their argument fell apart. This changes things significantly, Mr. Whitman admitted reluctantly. I'll need to file a new report with the territorial authorities. You do that, Jack said. In the meantime, these children stay right where they are. After the men left, Mary turned to Jack in amazement. How did you manage to produce a marriage certificate? We're not married, Jack smiled slightly. Not yet. But we will be, if you're willing. I had the papers drawn up yesterday, just in case. All we need to do is sign them in front of a minister or judge. Mary looked at this man who had just risked everything to protect her and the children. He had lied to government officials and committed himself to a marriage that would change both their lives forever. Are you sure about this? She asked quietly. I've never been more sure of anything, Jack replied. Those children need us, Mary. Both of us. And if marriage is what it takes to keep the wedding took place 2 days later in the small chapel just outside Cedar Ridge. Mary had never imagined her wedding day would be like this, a hurried ceremony with no guests except the children, no white dress, and no celebration. But as she stood next to Jack in her simple blue dress, she felt something she hadn't expected. Hope, Judge Williams, an elderly man who had known Jack's adoptive father, performed the ceremony. He had agreed to help when Jack explained the situation with the children. The judge had seen too many orphans end up in terrible situations, and he respected what Jack and Mary were trying to do. Do you, Jack Morrison, take Mary Sullivan to be your lawfully wedded wife? Judge Williams asked. I do, Jack said firmly, looking directly into Mary's eyes. And do you, Mary Sullivan, take Jack Morrison to be your lawfully wedded husband? Mary hesitated for just a moment. This was really happening. She was marrying a man she had known for only a few months, entering into an arrangement that would change everything about her life. But then she looked at the children, standing nearby. Lucy held Rose's hand while Ben stood close to Jack's side. These three little ones had already lost so much. They deserved a chance at happiness and security. "I do," Mary said clearly. Judge Williams smiled as he pronounced them husband and wife. "You may kiss the bride," he said gently. Jack and Mary looked at each other awkwardly. They hadn't discussed this part. After a moment, Jack leaned down and gave Mary a soft, brief kiss on the lips. It was their first kiss, and Mary felt her heart race at the gentle contact. The children clapped and cheered, not fully understanding the serious nature of what had just happened. To them, it seemed like a happy celebration. Jack and Mary had decided not to explain the legal reasons for their marriage. The children just knew that now they would all be a real family. The ride back to town was quiet. Mary sat next to Jack, on the wagon seat, wearing a simple gold ring he had bought for her. The children rode in the back, chattering excitedly about the ceremony and asking questions about what would happen now. "Will we move to Mr. Jack's ranch?" Lucy asked. "We'll see," Mary replied. "For now, we'll stay in our house in town." That evening, after the children were asleep, Jack and Mary sat in the kitchen discussing their new situation. The reality of what they had done was starting to sink in. "I want you to know," Jack said quietly, "I don't expect anything from you. Just because we're married now." This was about protecting the children, nothing more. Mary nodded, though she felt a strange disappointment at his words. "I understand. But where will you sleep? The house is small, and the children are in my bedroom." "I can sleep on the floor in the front room," Jack replied. "I've slept in worse places." "That's not fair to you," Mary protested. "You shouldn't have to be uncomfortable in your own home." Jack looked at her seriously. "Mary, I want to be very clear about something. I may be your husband on paper, but I would never presume to share your bed or expect marital privileges. That's not what this arrangement is about." Mary felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but also with something else she couldn't name. Jack was being respectful and honorable, but part of her wondered what it would be like if their marriage were real in every sense. "I appreciate that," she said softly. "But we should try to make this work for both of us. Maybe we can set up a proper bedroom for you in the back room." Over the next few weeks, they developed new routines as a married couple. Jack moved his belongings into the small back room, which they converted into a simple bedroom. He continued to help with repairs and household tasks, but now he also took on the role of husband and father. In the eyes of the community, the change in how people treated them was immediate and dramatic. The same people who had shunned Mary just weeks before now nodded politely when they passed her on the street. Shopkeepers who had been rude to her were suddenly courteous and helpful. It was as if marriage had transformed her from a scandalous woman into a respectable member of society overnight, but not everyone was happy about the marriage. Mayor Hutchinson was furious that his plans had been thwarted. He spread rumors that the marriage was fake, just a scheme to keep the children. Some people believed him, but without proof, there was nothing he could do legally. "People are talking," Mary told Jack one evening after a particularly uncomfortable encounter at the general store. "Let them talk," Jack replied. "As long as the children are safe, I don't care what people say." But Mary did care. She had lived in Cedar Ridge her whole life, and she hated being the subject of gossip and speculation. Some days she wondered if they had made a mistake. Maybe it would have been better to let the authorities take the children rather than enter into this complicated arrangement. Her doubts grew stronger when she realized how difficult it was to live with Jack without revealing her growing feelings. For him, every day she watched him interact with the children with patience and kindness. She saw how he worked hard to provide for their little family, often staying up late to do bookkeeping for local ranchers to earn extra money. She noticed how he always asked for her opinion before making decisions, treating her as a true partner despite their unconventional situation. But at night, when they said goodnight and went to their separate bedrooms, Mary felt lonely and confused. She was married to a good man who cared about her and the children, but she couldn't tell him how she really felt. What if he didn't feel the same way? What if admitting her feelings would ruin the comfortable arrangement they had built? Jack was struggling with similar feelings, though he hid them well. He had married Mary to protect the children, but somewhere along the way, his feelings had become much more complicated. He found himself looking forward to their quiet conversations in the evenings. He loved seeing Mary smile when the children did something amusing. He was moved by her dedication to their education and her fierce protectiveness of their welfare, but Jack had promised Mary that their marriage would be in name only, and he was determined to keep that promise. He had seen too many men take advantage of women in vulnerable situations. He wouldn't risk damaging the trust and friendship they had built by revealing feelings that might not be welcome. The tension between them grew as spring turned to summer. They were both careful to maintain appropriate boundaries, but their shared experiences and mutual respect were creating a deeper connection than either had expected. The children, meanwhile, were thriving. Ben had grown several inches and gained weight. His confidence had blossomed under Jack's mentorship, and he loved helping with the horses and learning ranch skills. Lucy was excelling in her studies with Mary and had begun helping teach Rose her letters. Rose, the youngest, had completely recovered from her early trauma. She was a bright, cheerful child who brought joy to everyone around her. One evening in July, as they watched the children play in the yard after dinner, Mary made a decision that surprised even herself. "Jack," she said quietly, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," he replied, though he looked a bit wary. "Do you ever regret marrying me? I mean, really regret it, not just the circumstances that made it necessary." Jack was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally, "I don't regret it, do you?" Mary shook her head. "No, but sometimes I wonder, what if this were a real marriage? What if we had chosen each other not just to protect the children, but because we wanted to be together?" Jack turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. "What are you saying, Mary?" "I'm saying that somewhere along the way, my feelings for you changed," she admitted, her heart pounding. "This started as a practical arrangement, but it's become something more for me. At least it has on my side." Jack stared at her in amazement. "You mean that?" "I mean it," Mary said, though she was terrified of his response. Jack was quiet for so long that Mary began to worry she had made a terrible mistake. Maybe he was trying to think of a kind way to reject her feelings. Maybe she had just ruined the comfortable partnership they had built. But then Jack reached over and took her hand. "Mary," he said softly, "I've been fighting the same feelings for months. I was afraid to say anything because I didn't want you to think I had married you under false pretenses." Mary felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. "So what do we do now?" Jack smiled, the first truly happy smile she had seen from him since their wedding day. "Now we stop pretending this is just a business arrangement and start building a real marriage, if that's what you want." "It's what I want," Mary said without hesitation. That night, for the first time since their wedding, Jack and Mary talked openly about their feelings and their hopes for the future. They decided to take things slowly, to court each other properly. Even though they were already married, they wanted to build their relationship on a foundation of genuine love and mutual respect, not just on the crisis that had brought them together. As they sat on the porch under the stars, watching their children sleep peacefully inside, Mary realized that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected circumstances. She had started out trying to save 3 orphan children, and ended up finding the love and family she had always dreamed of, but their happiness was about to be tested in ways they never imagined. Fall arrived in Cedar Ridge with golden leaves and crisp mornings that reminded everyone that winter would come again soon. But this year, Mary faced the changing season with hope instead of fear. For the first time since bringing the children home, she felt truly secure about their future. Jack and Mary's relationship had blossomed over the summer months. What had started as a marriage of convenience was becoming a real love story. They spent their evenings talking and planning, sharing dreams and fears they had never told anyone else. Jack courted Mary properly, bringing her wildflowers and taking her for walks in the evenings after the children were asleep. The children noticed the change in their guardians and seemed happier than ever. Ben, now 7 years old, had grown, strong and confident under Jack's guidance. He could care for horses, help with basic ranch work, and read better than many children his age. Lucy, 9, had become Mary's assistant teacher, helping Rose and Ben with their lessons. She was bright and curious, always asking questions about the world beyond their small town. Rose, now 5, was the joy of their household. The traumatized little girl who had once cowered in a cold barn was now a bright, laughing child who charmed everyone she met. She had completely forgotten the fear and hunger of her early years and grew up feeling loved and secure. But the biggest test of their new family unity came in early October when an unexpected visitor arrived in Cedar Ridge. Mary was teaching the children their morning lessons when she heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, she found a well-dressed woman in her 50s standing on the porch. "Miss Sullivan?" the woman asked, then corrected herself. "I mean, Mrs. Morrison?" "Yes," Mary replied cautiously. "Can I help you?" "My name is Mrs. Eleanor Carter. I'm from the territorial capital. I've come about the children." Mary's heart sank. Not again. Just when they thought their troubles were over, another official had come to question their arrangement. "What about the children?" Mary asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I represent a family in the capital who are interested in adopting one of them," Mrs. Carter explained. "Specifically the youngest girl? They've heard she's very pretty and well-behaved, and they're looking for a daughter to complete their family." Mary felt the blood drain from her face. Someone wanted to take Rose away from them? "I'm sorry, but the children are not available for adoption," Mary said firmly. "They have a home here with us." Mrs. Carter smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Morrison, I understand you've grown attached to these children, but you must think about what's best for them. The family I represent can offer opportunities you could never provide. Private tutors, fine clothes, travel, connections in society. Surely you want what's best for the little girl." "What's best for Rose is staying with her brother and sister in the only stable home she's ever known," Mary replied. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get back to my children." But Mrs. Carter wasn't finished. "I should mention that this family has considerable influence with the territorial government. If you refuse their generous offer, they might feel compelled to investigate whether this arrangement is truly in all the children's best interests." Mary understood the threat perfectly. Give up Rose or risk losing all 3 children? "I need to discuss this with my husband," Mary said finally. "Of course, I'll return tomorrow for your answer." That evening, Jack and Mary sat up late discussing the situation. Both of them were furious that someone would try to break up their family, but they also knew they were facing powerful people who could make their lives very difficult. "We can't let them take Rose," Mary said firmly. "It would destroy her to be separated from Lucy and Ben, and it would break our hearts." "I agree," Jack replied. "But we need to be smart about how we handle this. If we just refuse outright, they might bring in the authorities again. What do you suggest?" Jack was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I think it's time we called in some help of our own." The next morning, instead of waiting for Mrs. Carter to return, Jack rode out to visit Judge Williams, the man who had married them. He also stopped to see Dr. Collins, who had examined the children months earlier, and several other respected members of the community. By the time Mrs. Carter arrived that afternoon, she found not just Jack and Mary waiting for her, but Judge Williams, Dr. Collins, the new pastor of the local church, and 3 prominent ranchers from the area. "What is this?" Mrs. Carter asked, clearly taken aback by the group assembled in Mary's parlor. Judge Williams spoke first. "Mrs. Carter, these people have asked me to be here as a witness to this conversation. Before you say anything more about removing one of these children, I think you should know a few facts." "What facts?" Mrs. Carter asked suspiciously. Dr. Collins stepped forward. "I've been monitoring these children's health since they came to live with the Morrisons. They've made remarkable progress. Ben has gained 15 pounds and grown 3 inches. Lucy has overcome the respiratory problems she had from living in cold, damp conditions. And Rose has developed from a frightened, malnourished child into a healthy, happy little girl. Pastor Franklin, who had recently replaced the stern Reverend Mills, spoke next. I've had the privilege of getting to know this family over the past few months. The love and care these children receive here is exactly what they need. Breaking up this family would be cruel and unnecessary. One of the ranchers, Mr. Thompson, added his voice. Jack Morrison is one of the most respected men in this territory. He's built a successful ranch through hard work and honest dealing. Any suggestion that he and his wife can't provide properly for these children is ridiculous. Mrs. Carter looked around the room, clearly realizing that she was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. This is highly irregular, she said stiffly. What's irregular, Judge Williams replied, is someone from the territorial capital trying to break up a happy, healthy family based on the whims of wealthy people who want to treat children like possessions. I have legal authority, Mrs. Carter began, to investigate cases where children are being mistreated.